late nights, empty roads, and strangers with unsettling smiles. Ever wondered what hides in the shadows of your everyday life? Welcome to Ghostly Whispers, where the ordinary turns eerie, and your safe spaces might not be so secure after all. Tonight, we dive into chilling encounters that will make you question every friendly face, every late-night drive, and every quiet knock at the door. Are you ready to feel the fear? Story 1. I reside in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. A late-night diner by the side of the road was where I used to work. At the age of 29, I frequently worked the closing shift. Given the sparsely populated area, the diner's closing time of 2 a.m. needed to be on time. Despite its proximity to the highway, the building usually had 1 or 2 customers until closing. The people here differ from those in the South, where I grew up. Unlike the South, where people highly value small talk and hospitality, people here are nice but not overly gregarious. The atmosphere encourages introversion more. From my experience as a waitress in the South, the patrons there were much more talkative. People want to be a little more private up here. Closing time was drawing near. At 2 o'clock, the kitchen's final call was made. It was technically frowned upon for a customer to arrive and place an order late, even though the diner was advertised as closing at 2 o'clock. However, it did occur. In actuality, it took place that evening. The chef and I were the only staff members in the building. Around 1:50 a.m., a lone, heavy-set man entered. He wore glasses, a brown jacket, a gray shirt tucked in, and jeans that were too high. He also had a brown mustache. When I asked if he would prefer to sit at the bar, he requested a table. I returned his smile, which remained constant throughout. I handed him a menu and told him the kitchen would close in 10 minutes. After glancing at the menu briefly, he said he would like some French toast and a black coffee. He also identified himself as Nolan at this point. Fortunately, his order was simple enough. When I went into the kitchen and gave the chef the order, he still reacted with a little pain, to which I simply replied, "I know." Nolan gestured for me to come back out to the dining area. He started talking to me as I got closer, which is unusual for people in this area at this hour. After asking if I was from the area, he began complaining about all the local roads' potholes. "Yeah, it's all the freezes we get in the winter," I replied, using standard small talk. I mentioned that I'm from around here, and he might have asked too many specific questions about my origins. I gave him a broad overview of the area. Naturally, I keep my residence private from strangers. He claimed to have recently moved to the area. I examined his general demeanor and body language as he spoke. He gave off the impression of being an older, somewhat nerdy guy, and this might have been his way of flirting. However, having dealt with it frequently back home in the South, I was accustomed to it, so it didn't bother me. The chef came out and put his food on the counter, because this was the last customer of the evening. I went to get it so I could give it to Nolan. He had his coffee and food by now, and everything else was almost ready to close. I've already cleaned the tables, counters, and everything else. I was sick of talking to Nolan, so I stayed behind the counter a little farther away. I was exhausted from socializing and eager to get home and sleep. Before he even asked for his check, I went to deliver it when he finished his meal, gently hinting that we were closed and that he should go home. After making his card payment, he departed. I cleaned Nolan's table, gathered everything I owned, said goodbye to the man in the kitchen, and went out to my car because the chef would be closing. My car, the chef's car, and an unidentified third car were all in the lot. I wasn't sure, but it was a silver, older-looking vehicle resembling a 2005 Audi or Toyota. I could not determine whether the car's windows were tinted or the darkness prevented me from seeing inside. However, I could not determine whether a passenger was in the car. It was parked on the dirt closest to the highway, and I questioned whether it was Nolan's vehicle. I got into my car and drove home. It takes me roughly 20 minutes to get home from the diner. The tire pressure screen appeared, and I heard a ding from my dashboard while traveling on the highway. I began to panic because I had no idea how to change a tire. Never once had I given my roadside assistance company a call. I was still a respectable distance away. Suddenly, The tire pressure on my rear passenger side tire dropped from 20 to 10 very quickly, and I began to feel the entire car shake, not just the steering wheel. I had to stop driving. I quickly stopped and got out of the car to check the tire, which was as flat as possible. As it got closer to me, 2 headlights appeared on the side of the road, seemingly just flicked on, and then slowed to a stop. I quickly went back to my car and secured the door. I was at a loss for what to do when I heard a faint tap at my window. I noticed the man from the restaurant, Nolan, when I looked up. He smiled and waved to me. He had put on gloves. I'll give myself a fictitious name for the purposes of the narrative. Through the window, Nolan said, "Is that you, Kathy? Are you all right?" He pretended that it was a complete coincidence as he laughed. A knot formed in my stomach, and I immediately realized he had done this. I'm not a moron. I should lower the window, he gestured. I lowered it just enough to speak through, maybe 2 inches. He inquired if I needed assistance. I informed him that my tire was flat. He asked me which one, playing dumb. "The back passenger side," I said. It was at this point that I hit 911 on my phone as he began to cross over. As Nolan returned to my side, I allowed the phone to rest on my lap. He claimed to know how to change a flat while grinning eerily through the window. I said, "I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come and help me change it," when he asked me to get out of the car. The 911 operator called during this, but Nolan hardly heard it. I tried to communicate it to the operator as clearly as possible without being overt so Nolan could figure it out. I said, "I'm waiting for my boyfriend to help me change it, but I'm unsure how I got a flat. I appreciate your offering to help, sir." After standing there momentarily with a considerably less amicable expression, he moved away from the window. This allowed me to whisper into the phone that this man had cut my tire and was trying to get me out. I quickly opened my phone's map and gave the operator the name of the road I pulled off onto when she asked where I was. I screamed as glass fragments fell onto my lap from the loud shattering of glass directly to my left. I shouted loudly at the man, "I'm speaking to the police on the phone." "The police are here." He glanced at my screen as I showed him the phone screen before reaching inside the vehicle. I cried uncontrollably and screamed at the top of my lungs once more, fearing that he would try to strangle or grab me. Instead, he took my phone and threw it toward the highway. Then he dashed back to his vehicle and drove off the pitch-black street. He turned right abruptly and I heard his tires screeching before he vanished. Without flashlights in the car, I had to run outside in the dark to find my phone. My car was the only source of illumination. All I could do was wait and hope that Nolan, or whoever his true name was, didn't return. I appreciate that I promptly informed the 911 operator of my location. In the distance, I could clearly hear police sirens, and when I realized they were approaching, I began to cry with happiness. When I saw the flashing lights turn off the highway onto this random road, I exited my car and started waving my arms. Before long, a second and then a third police car arrived. We eventually located my phone, which had been destroyed during this period. I gave them a description of the man, his vehicle, and the direction he took. They also broadcast the information on their radio, and one of the policemen departed in that direction. To be honest, they were the kindest police officers I had ever encountered. One even gave me a ride home, escorting me from behind while they changed my tire. The main officer said they would investigate the diner's video surveillance and inform me of any developments. A week later, that officer called to inform me that the surveillance footage still supported the investigation. I didn't hear about it again after that. They probably didn't catch him. Unfortunately, I never went back to work at that diner again after. Second story. I'm a 15-year-old man who works at an amusement park in upstate New York. Even though this was only a year ago, the thought still chills me. It was a cool Sunday in October, one of the park's final days before it closed in May. I thought it was just another typical workday, but I needed clarification. I checked my watch after checking in and spent roughly 5 hours working at my station. It was 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before my shift ended. As I started packing my belongings, I was relieved and worn out when a man with untidy hair and a scraggly beard approached me. He wore black sweatpants with holes and a gray t-shirt with stains. "I just have to finish this last one," I told myself. "Can I help you?" I asked the man. After a few moments of staring at me, he continued to turn his head as though he were being followed, and I was beginning to feel a little uneasy. Sir, can I help you? I started sounding slightly irritated as I asked the same question again. Where are your bathrooms? He stammered out after glancing at me for a few seconds. He spoke in a whisper as he said this. Up the hill to the right, was my upbeat reply. The man turned and continued to stare at me even as he began to walk in that direction. Even though I was more terrified than ever, I avoided eye contact. Before I knew it, one of my co-workers had arrived to replace me. After gathering my belongings, I ran across the park to the back room to end my shift and headed to the restroom. After changing out of my work clothes, I went to the employee parking lot. I waited to be picked up by my 17-year-old co-worker Jordan on a bench. Jordan picked me up after what felt like hours of waiting. We had some cheeseburgers for dinner at the neighborhood diner before heading home. I noticed something strange while I was eating in the restaurant. The man I assisted in locating the restrooms at the park was sitting a few tables down at the diner, looking directly at me. A beat skipped in my chest. Jordan simply dismissed it when I brought it up to him. Ben, it's a coincidence. Do not be concerned. Yeah, I replied, despite my general concern. We returned to the car after dinner and began the 35-minute drive home. My heart skipped another beat when I noticed something at the first red light we came to. The man from the park and diner sat in his white Honda to our right. He was indeed staring back at me. Jordan became a little concerned after I told him. After getting to our street, we ran a few laps around the block to ensure the man wasn't pursuing us. Once it was clear, Jordan dropped me off at home. I was alone at home because my dad was on a business trip, and my mom and sister were at the mall. I immediately jumped into bed but heard something outside my window. I got up slowly and went outside, seeing something that always made me shiver. The man stood on my front lawn, grinning and staring directly at my window. I quickly picked up my phone and dialed 911, but the man was gone when the police arrived. When the amusement park closed for the winter, I quit my job there. Ever since this incident, I haven't seen the man. I will always remember this experience. Story 3. I worked the late-night shift for a year at the diner where I was employed. The night was wet. It was really pouring. These nights typically resulted in fewer patrons because nobody was in a rush to drive in the rain. For the most part, the night was as slow as I had anticipated. Up until midnight, I was at work. Toward the end of my shift, a man and a woman who appeared to be much younger than him entered. She seemed to be in her 20s while he was in his 40s. They both turned to face me as soon as they entered, so I approached them to say hello and inquire about their number. After they said there were only 2, I took them to a table. As they took their time placing their orders, I observed that they conversed in hushed tones. The man started talking to me after they placed their order. It was a slow night anyway, the usual back and forth between a waitress and a customer, so I started talking their ears off because I'm generally talkative, which is why I've always thrived in the hospitality industry. I started asking more questions of the man because, strangely, he spoke more than the girl did. I can't recall everything we said in our last conversation, but the man's question, "Do you live alone?" stuck in my memory. I used to live alone, and I still do. I replied to his question by stating that it's quiet and dull here, and that I lived about 10 minutes north up the road. Even though his question seemed odd then, it wasn't a warning sign. When a man is with another woman, you automatically assume they're not a threat. I joked that I would be stuck here forever before leaving the table. They finished and departed after 45 minutes. An hour or so later, we were likely closing the establishment. After saying goodbye to my coworkers, I ran to my car to avoid getting wet from the rain. Outside, it was still pouring. The conditions caused me to drive slowly home. As soon as I arrived home, I hurried to the front door and opened it. Neither of the other tenants had their cars parked outside, which escaped my notice. I lived on the middle floor of a house that had 3 apartments. All 3 floors are accessible via a stairway leading from the side entrance. I could enter through the front door because I was on the first floor. I put my belongings and keys on the kitchen counter and heard a crazy hammering at the front door. It was almost 1 a.m. Any other tenants in the house could be it, but I had no idea. There are 2 doors, the inner door and the glass storm door. For safety, I always keep both locked. When I opened the inner door, a girl was standing on the other side of the storm door. She wore a gray sweater with the hood covering part of her face and was soaked. She pleaded with me to let her in so she could use her phone. I had to feel her out before I did that. Of course, I asked her if she was lost. She responded that she needed assistance because a strange man was following her. But there was something very familiar about this girl. I questioned her about the man's identity and location. With a quick turnaround, she said, "I don't know." She tried opening the door herself and kept pleading with me. Then I understood why she had a familiar appearance. She resembled the girl with that man at the diner. "Aren't you at my diner before?" was the direct question I asked her. My question went unanswered. Perhaps she didn't hear me, but she turned around again and panicked, banging on the door and exclaiming, "There he is." I noticed a big man approaching the house slowly as I glanced over her to the street. The girl continued to stare at me as the man approached, her expression suggesting that she was more perplexed than anything else about why I was not opening the door. The man approached me closely enough for me to recognize that I was correct. This was the girl who was sitting with him at the diner, and it was that man from the restaurant. I believe she turned to the man and yelled, "Go!" as soon as she saw it in my eyes. I slammed the inner door shut and locked it as the man began to charge at it. They didn't bang or knock, and I didn't open the door to check. I proceeded to the stairs to go upstairs and knock on the tenant's door. Each level has a door that separates the staircase from the 3 apartments. I knocked several times, but no one answered. I also tried the downstairs door, but there was no response. When I peered out the windows, I noticed that none of their cars were present at night. I was alone in the house. After returning to my apartment, I locked the door to the stairway. My thoughts were racing with potential explanations. The most obvious answer was that it was a ruse to get me to open the door so they could rob me or worse. That man's question about whether I lived alone suddenly made sense. I had to sit on the couch for a few minutes and reflect. The sound of the rain outside was all I could hear. I considered phoning the police, but decided against it at the time. After a few minutes, I heard a knocking sound as I was getting ready for bed and brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I stepped out of the restroom to listen. Sure enough, it was a knocking noise. It came from the door of the stairway. Assuming it was one of the tenants, I approached it. "Who is it?" I was asked. Whoever it was knocked again, but there was no vocal reply. I called out the names of the other 2 tenants, but have yet to receive an answer. "If you don't identify yourself, I'm calling the police," was all I could say. They definitely heard me when I practically screamed it. Then they knocked again. "What do you want?" I shouted, and someone else's voice said, "Your blood on me." I hurried to my room, locked myself in, and dialed 911. While I was on the phone, I remained hidden in my closet. I was always startled by the sounds of the rain, wind, and thunder outside. Any slight noise coming from inside the house worried me. Before I was instructed to let the police into the house at the front door, I had the longest 10 minutes of my life. After checking the front and backyard and writing a report on everything, they advised me to find somewhere else to stay for a few nights. I quickly packed my bags while they were there and drove to my parents' house to spend the night. The following day, I went back to the house. This time, my upstairs neighbor knocked on the staircase door. "What's this about?" he asked, pointing to the door when I opened it. To my horror, a note on the door read, "Thanks for the service, Beth." It was inscribed in marker. I had to spend a few weeks with my parents until this situation was resolved because I couldn't stay there long. The following month, I found a new apartment relatively nearby. Better safe than sorry. You never truly know what's lurking in the dark, do you? If these stories sent shivers down your spine, hit that subscribe button and like this video for more tales that will haunt you. And don't forget, another nightmare awaits you in our next video. Keep your lights on, and we'll see you again soon.